What happens when the child you raised becomes your executioner? It's a question that shouldn't exist outside of Shakespearean tragedy or late-night true crime dramatizations. But for Hollywood royalty Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner, it became a horrifying reality. And not in some far-off, abandoned alley or obscure motel in the middle of nowhere, but in the heart of Brentwood, Los Angeles. An elite, Palmline neighborhood. A place where celebrity fences stretch tall and silence is golden. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Except this time, the silence screamed. At 3:40 p.m. on a seemingly ordinary Sunday afternoon, paramedics and LAPD officers arrived at the Reiner home after a wellness check was requested by a concerned associate. What they found inside that sun-soaked estate was carnage. Blood, broken glass, signs of struggle. But more than that, betrayal. And the alleged culprit? Their own son, Nick Reiner, 32 years old, once the golden boy of a famous family. Now, a suspect in a double homicide so brutal, it left seasoned detectives shaken. And then, barely 6 hours later, Nick was in handcuffs. But that's just the beginning. Because what unfolded next would expose the fractures behind Hollywood's golden veneers. The jealousies, the addictions, the whispered warnings that friends say were ignored. And at the center of it all, Nick Reiner, the failed writer, the troubled heir, the man now facing a double first-degree murder charge with special circumstances, a legal term that, if convicted, could land him a life sentence without parole, or worse. But here's the thing no one's talking about yet. Nick might not survive long enough to see a courtroom verdict. Because 1 minute ago, news broke from inside the correctional facility where Nick is being held. He's been attacked, stabbed, not fatally yet, but this changes everything. It cracks open questions that have been simmering just below the surface. Who wants him silenced? What was Rob hiding before he died? Why did Nick disappear for hours before his arrest? And who did he meet with during that time? And what was really said during that explosive argument at Conan O'Brien's house the night before the murders? We're going to unpack everything, piece by piece, detail by disturbing detail. Because this isn't just a murder story. It's a story about legacy. About the lies we tell to protect the image of a perfect family. And about the price of silence in a world obsessed with appearances. But before we go further, you need to understand the man at the center of this storm. Nick Reiner was born into fame. His father, Rob Reiner, directed some of the most beloved films in American history. When Harry Met Sally, Stand By Me, A Few Good Men. His mother, Michelle Singer, a quiet but elegant presence, was the glue of the family, at least publicly. Behind the scenes, sources say she walked a tightrope, always smoothing the tension between father and son, a dynamic that turned from strained to volatile. There were signs. There were always signs. Nick's childhood was marked by privilege, sure, but also whispers of trouble. Private schools, therapy sessions, multiple stints in rehab before the age of 25. And yet, for every headline he avoided, there were also moments of promise. He co-wrote Being Charlie with his father in 2015, a semi-autobiographical story about a young addict trying to reclaim his life. Critics called it raw and brave, but insiders say Nick was already unraveling again, even then. By 2022, the family was reportedly fractured. Rob was busy filming, Michelle kept a low profile, and Nick had disappeared from the public eye entirely. Rumors swirled. Was he back in rehab? Had he relapsed? Or worse? But no one imagined this ending. Here's what we know. Saturday night, less than 24 hours before the murders, Rob and Nick were both seen at a party hosted by none other than Conan O'Brien. Multiple A-listers were present. It was supposed to be a celebration of upcoming film projects. A gathering of friends and Hollywood power players. But somewhere between the cocktails and catered hors d'oeuvres, father and son exploded. Witnesses say the shouting match was brief, but ugly. Loud enough to turn heads. Enough to make people uncomfortable. Enough that Conan allegedly walked them out personally. That was the last time anyone outside the family saw Rob and Nick alive together. 12 hours later, Rob and Michelle were dead. 12 hours later, Nick was gone, vanished. 12 hours later, nothing about the Reiner legacy would ever be the same again. And then, like a trail of gasoline waiting for a spark, The timeline lit up. Nick was spotted on surveillance checking into a small Santa Monica hotel hours before police were even called. He was alone, agitated. According to staff, he barely spoke. Paid in cash. Didn't check out. Then, hours later, he showed up at a gas station in Exposition Park, South LA. Video shows him pacing, buying a water bottle, wearing the same clothes seen on security footage from the night before, but now they were stained with something dark, something red. When LAPD finally cornered him in the alley behind that gas station, he didn't run. He smiled. But here's what really chills investigators to the bone. When asked if he understood his rights, Nick Reiner didn't respond. Not immediately. Instead, he reportedly asked, "Did they read the note yet?" What note? What was written in it? Who was it meant for? Authorities haven't released those details, but insiders are whispering that what Nick wrote may have been planned. That this wasn't a crime of passion, but of premeditation. That for months, Nick may have been spiraling, researching, tracking, even documenting his descent. There's talk of journals, hard drives, a hidden safe inside the Reiner estate. Even more disturbing, one LAPD source claims they found a second phone in the Santa Monica hotel. A burner phone, wiped clean. Except for one file name. The end of them. But even that's not the scariest part. Because right now, as we record this, Nick Reiner has been moved into protective custody following a violent stabbing inside the Los Angeles County Jail. The attack was swift. The weapon, handmade. The motive? Unknown. But someone wanted him gone. And now, all of Hollywood is asking, did Nick plan to take secrets to his grave? Or did someone want him silenced before those secrets came out? And what was so dangerous, so explosive, that someone risked a murder inside prison to stop him from talking? We're going to walk you through the whole twisted timeline. Every frame of security footage. Every whisper from family insiders. Every redacted court document. Because this isn't just about the Reiners anymore. It's about what happens when the mask of celebrity slips, and all that's left underneath is rage, regret, and ruin. And if you think you know the whole story, trust me, you don't. Because what Nick Reiner said during his first prison phone call, caught on tape, shocked even the most hardened detectives. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Who could have imagined that in a home lined with Oscars, family photos, and designer rugs, the floor would be soaked in blood? Brentwood was supposed to be safe. It wasn't just another wealthy LA neighborhood. It was the neighborhood. Gated estates. Celebrities tucked away behind tall ficus hedges. Private security doing slow patrols 24/7. This wasn't some rundown Hollywood apartment or isolated desert shack where crime hid in plain sight. This was Brentwood, where you don't expect horror, where you don't see crime scenes. Until that Sunday. At precisely 3:37 p.m., a quiet call went out to the LAPD. A wellness check. Nothing urgent. Just a request from a Reiner family assistant who hadn't heard from Rob or Michelle since the night before. No texts. No calls. No answered doorbell. No motion on the Ring camera. Strange. Sure. But not panic-worthy. Not yet. The patrol unit that responded? 2 seasoned officers, both used to domestic disputes and false alarms. They expected an elderly couple might have turned off their phones or gone out of town without notice. They were wrong. The front door was locked. All windows appeared intact. But one officer noted the mailbox was stuffed, something that didn't match the Reiner's usual pattern. A second officer knocked again. Still no answer. That's when one of them noticed it. A faint trail of something, dark, shiny, just under the side garage door. It could have been oil. Maybe a spilled drink. But it wasn't. One push, and the garage creaked open. And there was the first clue that this wasn't just a routine call. A shoe. A woman's flat. Covered in blood. Not a smear. Not a drop. A soaking pool. Suddenly, protocol snapped into place. Guns drawn. Backup called. Body cams activated. At 3:46 p.m., the officers breached the home through the kitchen. What they walked into has since been described by one responding unit as pure carnage. Not the kind you see in clean, orderly murders, but rage. Chaos. The kitchen was trashed. A fruit bowl smashed on the floor. Cabinets left open. A knife block empty. In the adjacent dining room was Rob Reiner. Face down. No pulse. His body was cold, stiff. Multiple stab wounds to the back, neck, and one to the right side of the chest, deep enough to expose bone. Blood had pooled beneath the hardwood floors, soaking into the grain. It was deliberate, methodical, clinical, or was it emotional? Michelle was found 5 feet away, on the ground, palm up, one eye swollen shut, her blouse torn, and a different weapon, a carving fork protruding from her abdomen. Let that sink in. Rob and Michelle, stabbed with different weapons. 2 people, 2 deaths, 2 murder methods. Yet only one suspect, Nick Reiner. But was it that simple? Because something about the scene didn't quite add up. One detective noted that there were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows. Whoever killed them had either been invited in or already lived there. And Nick Reiner? He had a key. But here's where things get murkier. Forensics later revealed that Michelle had defensive wounds on her hands and forearms, suggesting she fought back. Hard. Multiple bruises. Broken fingernails. And on one of those nails, investigators found something odd. A tiny fiber, bright blue, synthetic, thread-like, from clothing not belonging to Rob or Michelle, nor anything Nick was wearing in the arrest video later that night. So where did it come from? A mystery guest? A change of clothes? Or someone else entirely? But wait, it gets darker. In the hallway between the kitchen and foyer, blood spatter formed a strange pattern. Forensic experts say it looked like someone tried to clean part of the floor, but stopped halfway. There were drag marks, swirls, and smudged footprints. One barefoot, one sneakered, both leading to the guest bathroom. Inside the bathroom, a sink wiped clean, bleach bottle open, one faucet still dripping. And in the bathtub, a shirt, soaked, Nick's size, designer brand, torn collar, blood-soaked, but not just from his parents. Because among the evidence taken from the shirt was a third blood type, unidentified. A match is still pending. Let's zoom out for a second. What does this tell us? It tells us that the killer, presumably Nick, didn't just snap and run. They stayed. They cleaned. They planned. This wasn't some blind fury. This was a storm that had been building. And the walls of that house. They'd heard it coming for years. Neighbors later told police that heated arguments were nothing new. Shouting, door slams. Even one report, never followed up on, of disturbing noise 2 months earlier. But they were the Reiners, Hollywood royalty. No one wanted to stir trouble. No one wanted to believe something was wrong. Until it was far, far too late. Now, you might be wondering, where was Nick during all this? Well, that's the next bizarre twist. Because while the murders are estimated to have happened between 1:15 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, Nick wasn't arrested until 9:15 p.m. That's nearly 19 hours. So where was he? And how did police track him down? Let's break it down. Security footage from the Reiner property shows a male figure leaving the back gate at approximately 2:42 a.m. Dark hoodie. Limps slightly. Carries what looks like a duffel bag. No visible blood. Later that morning, 6:15 a.m., Nick Reiner checks into a Santa Monica motel using an alias. Staff confirm he appeared disheveled, distracted, but not obviously injured. At 2 p.m., police discover the bodies. By 4:30 p.m., Nick's name is on the suspect list. But here's where it gets even weirder. Before his arrest, Nick stopped at a Chevron gas station in Exposition Park. Cameras catch him pacing, buying water and bandages. Bandages. When he's arrested an hour later, he's got a slash wound across his arm. Fresh. Unbandaged. Self-inflicted? Defensive wound? Gang initiation? Too early to tell. But inside his backpack was the real shock. One bloodied knife. One family photo, torn in half. One USB stick, labeled Play Me. And perhaps most disturbing of all, a child's drawing. Old. Crumpled. Of a house on fire, and 2 figures inside. Detectives now believe that Nick had been carrying that drawing for years. A symbol? A warning? A prophecy? We don't know yet. What we do know is that this crime scene was never random. It was personal. And whatever happened that night in Brentwood wasn't just about anger. It was about legacy, control, resentment, and silence. So much silence. But one sound broke that silence completely. The 911 call. Police haven't released the full audio yet. But here's what a source close to the investigation claims was heard on the tape. A whisper. Soft. Raspy. From Michelle. Just one word. Why? And then silence. The kind of silence that screams through every corner of $1 million home. But even now, after bloodstains have been scrubbed and headlines have shifted, the biggest question remains. Why? Why would a son do this? Why would Nick, after years of reconciliation attempts and family therapy, choose this? Why now? And more urgently, was he working alone? Because a recently unsealed search warrant has revealed that Nick made one final call before arriving at that gas station. A call to a contact listed only as Dr. M, and that number was disconnected 2 hours later. But who is Dr. M? What was said? And why has every trace of that phone number disappeared? The answers are coming. And when you hear what Nick told that mysterious caller, you'll realize this story isn't just about a Hollywood family's fall. It's about the cover-up that followed, and the people willing to do anything to make sure their secrets stay buried. What kind of child grows up in paradise and still feels abandoned? That's the question detectives kept circling as they sifted through Nick Reiner's life. Not just the last 48 hours, but the last 3 decades. Because when you strip away the headlines, the police tape, the blood-soaked floorboards, what's left is a boy who never quite found his place in a world that expected him to shine. Nick Reiner didn't just grow up wealthy. He grew up legend-adjacent. Film sets instead of playgrounds. Table reads instead of bedtime stories. Adults praising him for being so articulate before he was old enough to understand what that even meant. Imagine that pressure. Now imagine failing under it. From the outside, Nick's childhood looked like a dream. Private schools, tutors, summers on studio lots, family dinners with people whose names appeared in movie trailers. But insiders tell a very different story, one filled with emotional whiplash and impossible expectations. Rob Reiner was not an absent father, but he was a demanding one, a man driven by ideas, principles, discipline. When Rob entered a room, people listened. When Rob spoke, conversations stopped. Nick struggled just to be heard. Teachers reported early behavioral issues, mood swings, explosive anger followed by days of silence. At age 11, Nick was already seeing therapists. At 14, medication entered the picture. By 17, there were whispers of substance use, first alcohol, then pills. And here's the contradiction that haunts this story. Rob Reiner spent decades making films about empathy, understanding, humanity. But inside his own home, friends say he didn't know what to do with a son who couldn't get it together. One former family friend put it bluntly. Rob believed discipline fixed everything. Nick needed something else. Nobody knew what. By Nick's early 20s, the gap between father and son had turned into a canyon. Nick wanted to write, to direct, to be taken seriously, not as Rob Reiner's kid, but as himself. He pitched scripts, dark ones, angry ones. Studios passed, over and over. Each rejection chipped away at him. Each success of his father, a reminder of what he wasn't. By 24, Nick had entered rehab for the first time. Quietly, privately, the family released a carefully worded statement about exhaustion and creative burnout. But inside that facility, counselors were documenting something far more concerning. Paranoia. Nick reportedly believed people were talking about him, plotting against him, sabotaging his work behind closed doors. At first, doctors chalked it up to substance-induced anxiety. But the thoughts didn't go away when he got clean. They intensified. And yet, here's the twist. There were moments when Nick seemed to turn a corner. In 2015, he co-wrote a film with his father, a semi-autobiographical story about addiction, recovery, and fractured relationships. On paper, it was supposed to heal old wounds. Instead, it reopened them. Sources from the production say the collaboration was tense. Nick wanted creative control. Rob wanted structure. Meetings turned heated. One argument reportedly ended with Nick storming out, yelling, "You don't want a son. You want a mirror." Let that sink in. A mirror. Someone to reflect greatness back at you. After the film's release, reviews were mixed. The industry didn't embrace Nick the way he hoped. And once again, he spiraled. Multiple rehabs followed. Different facilities. Different doctors. Which brings us back to that name. Dr. M. Investigators digging into Nick's medical history found something alarming. In the past 6 years, Nick had cycled through no fewer than 4 psychiatrists. Most dropped him as a patient. One cited noncompliance. Another noted escalating fixation on perceived betrayals. But Dr. M? Dr. M stayed. Longer than anyone else. And according to leaked notes, Dr. M didn't just treat Nick. He listened. Nick spoke about being erased, about his parents locking away things that belonged to him, about a family secret that, in his words, would destroy everything if it ever came out. Doctors are trained to filter delusions from reality. But what if some of what Nick believed was real? Here's where the timeline gets uncomfortable. 2 months before the murders, Nick reportedly demanded access to a locked cabinet in Rob's home office. Family members say Rob refused. There was shouting. Doors slammed. Michelle cried. What was in that cabinet? Legal documents? Financial records? Something personal? We don't know yet. But we do know that after that argument, Nick sent a series of texts to friends that read like a goodbye. I tried. They never listened. It ends soon. Friends brushed it off as another emotional episode. Another mistake. Because Nick didn't see himself as failing anymore. He saw himself as wronged. And resentment is a dangerous thing when mixed with untreated mental illness. In the months leading up to the killings, Nick became increasingly isolated. He cut off friends, deleted social media, stopped answering calls, except one. Dr. M. Phone records show Nick called Dr. M repeatedly in the week before the murders. Long conversations, sometimes over an hour. And on the night of the Conan O'Brien party, there was a call at 12:18 a.m., 7 minutes long. What was said during those 7 minutes may hold the key to everything. Because when Nick left that party, witnesses say he wasn't just angry. He was resolved. People describe his face as empty, not furious, not drunk, just done. And here's the chilling contradiction that keeps detectives awake at night. Nick didn't flee the country. He didn't destroy evidence completely. He didn't lawyer up immediately. Instead, he lingered, checked into a nearby hotel, walked into a gas station in broad daylight, almost as if he wanted to be seen, almost as if he wanted the story to unfold exactly this way. So ask yourself this. Is Nick Reiner a cold-blooded killer? Or is he a deeply broken man who believed, rightly or wrongly, that destroying his parents was the only way to expose a truth he thought they buried? Because when police finally got Nick into that interrogation room, something strange happened. He didn't deny killing them. He didn't confess either. Instead, he said one sentence. They know why. Who is they? The public? The police? Hollywood? Or someone else entirely? And now, after the prison stabbing, after an apparent attempt to silence him, the urgency has changed. Because if Nick talks, if he survives long enough to talk, everything we think we know about this case could collapse. And that's why what happened at Conan O'Brien's house, the argument, the witnesses, the words exchanged, has become the most crucial missing puzzle piece. Because that argument wasn't just loud. It was a breaking point. And the people who heard it, they're not talking. Yet. But someone will. And when they do, the truth behind Nick Reiner's transformation, from heir to addict to outcast, will finally come into focus. And it won't be pretty, because next, we go inside that party. The drinks, the laughter, the sudden silence, and the argument that may have lit the fuse. What happens when the mask slips? In front of everyone. Hollywood parties are a strange kind of theater. On the surface, they're all charm and Chardonnay, glitz, gossip, and carefully practiced smiles. But beneath the curated playlists and manicured conversations, there's a quiet desperation. Everyone wants something. A deal, a role, a reconciliation, or in Nick Reiner's case, a reckoning. Saturday night was supposed to be unremarkable. Just another networking soiree in the hills, hosted by Conan O'Brien, a man known as much for his self-deprecating wit as his obsession with old-school Hollywood charm. The guest list? A who's who of creatives, producers, late-night hosts, legacy directors, and yes, Rob Reiner and his son, Nick. Eyewitnesses say the Reiners didn't arrive together. Rob came first, smiling, confident, wearing his usual linen shirt and that signature calm that made people instinctively gather around him. Nick, however, showed up almost an hour later. Alone, dressed down, unshaven, eyes sunken, a whiskey already in hand. Something was off. Now let's pause here. Why does this party matter? Why spend a whole chapter on what should have been just another Hollywood gathering? Because what happened at this party wasn't just a father and son blowing off steam. It was a public detonation. And it may have been the final trigger in a chain reaction that ended in bloodshed less than 24 hours later. The moment Nick entered, people noticed. Not because he was charming, but because he was circling, like a man trying to summon the nerve for something. A confrontation? A confession? Nobody could say. Conan, ever the diplomatic host, welcomed him with a warm handshake. But several guests later said they saw Conan glance toward Rob, eyebrows raised, as if checking whether Nick's presence was expected. Spoiler, it wasn't. According to two guests, Rob immediately stiffened when he saw his son. His smile dropped. The air changed. Rob pulled Nick aside near the pool area. Witnesses couldn't hear the words, but body language told the story. Tense. Short nods. A hand shoved into a pocket. And then, Rob walking away. Nick, standing alone. Face blank. But here's where it turns. Roughly 15 minutes later, as small talk resumed and guests began mingling by the fire pit, a shout cut through the evening. You owe me the truth. It was Nick. Every head turned. He was yelling at Rob. At first, people thought it was a joke. A loud bit. An awkward family skit. But the rage in Nick's voice was real. You lied to me. My entire life. You promised. Rob cut him off. Firm. Quiet. Too quiet for most to hear. But the silence in the courtyard was deafening. Then Nick shouted again. Tell them about the file. That's when Conan stepped in. He reportedly walked between them, placing a hand on Nick's shoulder. Whispered something. Nick shrugged him off. You all pretend he's some saint, Nick said, gesturing to the crowd. But you don't know him. You never did. Rob didn't respond. He didn't yell. He simply looked at his son and said, according to one shaken guest, Go home, Nick. And Nick did. But not before turning around one last time and saying a sentence no one there will forget. I'm done pretending we're a family. Let that sit. Because for years, Rob Reiner worked to rebuild his public image as a family man. A peacemaker. Someone who had battled creative demons and won. That night, with one explosive scene, Nick shattered that image. But that wasn't all. Security footage later subpoenaed from Conan's residence. Yes, it exists. Showed Nick pacing near the guest bathroom, alone. 5 minutes before his exit, he pulled out his phone, made a call. To Dr. M. Same number, same voice. 7 minutes. The exact call investigators now believe was central to the unraveling that followed. But here's where the story veers into darkness. One guest, who asked to remain anonymous, claims that earlier in the evening, Rob had mentioned a safety deposit box. He was joking, or so people thought. Something about leaving things behind for when the world finally loses its mind. Now, in the wake of the murders, that line feels like foreshadowing. Because that file Nick screamed about, it wasn't a metaphor. It was real. Police, acting on an anonymous tip, searched a hidden compartment in Rob's home office. Inside, they found a folder. Sealed. Marked only with the initials NR. What's inside remains under wraps. But sources close to the investigation say it contains personal letters from Rob to Nick, and one letter in particular, dated exactly 1 month before the murders, is now considered key evidence. In that letter, Rob allegedly wrote, I've tried to help you. God knows I've tried. But I won't be blackmailed by my own son. Blackmailed? Let that word echo. What did Nick know? What did he threaten to reveal? What truth could tear apart a family so severely that Rob felt the need to hide it in a safe, sealed envelope? Whatever it was, it may have been the wedge that snapped everything. Back at the party, the atmosphere never quite recovered. Guests left early. The laughter dulled. Even Conan, known for his levity, reportedly spent the rest of the night in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones to his wife. Something had cracked open that evening, and within 24 hours, it would all go up in flames. Now here's the twist. Two guests claim that as Nick left the party, he whispered something to himself. They couldn't hear it clearly. But one person, a producer with sharp ears, swears she heard him say, It's done. They'll all see. And that wasn't the voice of a man confused. That was the voice of someone who had made a decision. So what did Nick mean by the file? What was inside that envelope? What did Rob hide from the world and from his own child? And most of all, who was Nick really talking to in those final moments? Dr. M? Himself? Or something darker? Because the next morning, Rob and Michelle Reiner would be found dead in their home. And the only person left to explain what happened that night would soon be sitting in an interrogation room, silent, smiling, bleeding. But before that, we need to go back even further, to the last dinner the family ever shared. A restaurant table, 3 empty wine glasses. A final conversation laced with tension so thick, it bled into the air. Because what happened during the final supper? Just hours before the murders, holds clues no one saw coming. Can a family dinner be an autopsy? Not of flesh, but of a relationship. A dynamic. A life lived under glass, now cracking. That Saturday night, just hours after the explosive confrontation at Conan O'Brien's home, Rob Reiner, Michelle Singer Reiner, and their son Nick sat down at an upscale restaurant in Santa Monica. It was a reservation made days in advance. Not impulsive, not accidental. They chose Tavola di Mare, an Italian seafood restaurant known for its discretion and privacy. Celebrity clientele. No paparazzi. A corner booth in the back. Candlelit. Quiet. But what unfolded there was anything but peaceful. Let's break it down minute by minute. 7:42 p.m. Arrival. Surveillance cameras from a nearby parking structure caught them entering. Rob leads, expression neutral. Michelle follows, arm lightly touching her husband's back. Nick is last. His hands are shoved deep in his hoodie. Head down. No eye contact. Staff inside say the three barely spoke as they were seated. Menus opened. Then silence. No drinks ordered, at first. 7:53 p.m. Tension rises. According to their server, Michelle tried to smooth things over by commenting on the menu. They have the branzino you like. Nick didn't respond. Rob reportedly sighed. Long audible. It was the kind of sigh you give someone you've run out of patience for. One staff member told investigators. It didn't feel like a dinner. It felt like a standoff. Still, they ordered. Michelle requested a glass of Pinot Grigio. Rob went for his usual sparkling water. Nick finally ordered spaghetti with clams and a neat whiskey. The staff noticed he hadn't shaved. He looked tired. More than that, he looked haunted. 8:12 p.m. The conversation turns. According to a waitress passing by their table, the following words were overheard. Rob, this isn't the place. Nick, no, this is exactly the place. Rob, you're not thinking clearly. Nick, you've been hiding things for years. And then Michelle, voice low, breaking. Please don't do this now. Not here. The food arrived minutes later, but it went untouched. Michelle picked at her grilled vegetables. Rob ate 2 bites of risotto. Nick? Nothing. Not even a fork lifted. He stared at his father. Eyes locked. No blinking. 8:29 p.m. The toast. Here's where it gets chilling. A nearby couple, seated just a few feet away, told police they saw Nick raise his glass, untouched until that point. He raised it slowly, deliberately, looked at Rob, and said softly, "To the truth. May it outlive you." Rob's face went pale. Michelle began to cry. She wasn't loud. Just tears. A slow, defeated stream. The couple didn't know whether to intervene. They didn't know the context. But they felt it. Something had ended. And now we come to the moment that may haunt this investigation forever. 8:43 p.m. The gift box. Staff recall Nick placing a small, wrapped package on the table. Red ribbon. White box. No tag. He slid it across to Michelle. She didn't touch it. Nick reportedly whispered, "You always protected him. But you knew." She said nothing. Rob stood. Napkin tossed. He didn't even look back as he walked out the front door. Nick followed seconds later. Michelle remained. She stared at the box for several minutes, then stood. But here's the thing. She left the box behind. When staff tried to return it, she refused. "It's not mine," she said. It never was. To this day, that box has never been found. The restaurant manager says it was gone when they cleaned the table. No trace. No footage showing who took it. Was it retrieved by Nick? Did Michelle circle back in secret? Or did someone else watching, someone unseen, take it? What was in that box? A photo? A flash drive? A confession? Or maybe, just maybe, a final warning? 9:05 p.m. The family walks to their car. Security footage from the valet stand shows them together again. Rob in front, fast walking. Michelle a few steps behind. Nick trailing. This would be the final footage ever captured of Rob Reiner alive. He doesn't look back once. Nick, however, stares straight into the camera. Expression unreadable. No smile. No frown. Just stillness. Investigators later tried enhancing the footage. One forensic technician claims Nick, what if the murder wasn't the breaking point, but the result of a broken promise? Before the cameras. Before the crime scene. Before the screaming match at Conan O'Brien's house, there were letters, emails, voicemails, all ignored. Because Nick Reiner didn't just snap. He built toward this. For years. The public didn't see it. The media didn't know. Even close friends assumed it was just another privileged son clashing with his successful father. But buried beneath the Reiner family's Hollywood sparkle was rot. And it started with a single word that now echoes through every police file. Inheritance. Let's rewind. In 2018, Rob Reiner was approached by his legal team to begin updating his will. At the time, this wasn't strange. He was in his 70s. A natural planner. He wanted things organized. Here's where it gets complicated. Nick was originally listed as a primary beneficiary. But when the revised documents were finalized in late 2019, his name had been removed. The bulk of the Reiner estate, reportedly valued at over $80 million, was now directed into a foundation, managed by longtime family attorney Michael Larchmont and Rob's daughter from a previous marriage, Tracy Reiner. Nick was given something else. A letter. 1 page. Handwritten. Sealed in a separate envelope. No money. No property. Just words. Detectives later found a copy of that letter in Nick's belongings. Here's a fragment of what it said. Nick, you are my son, but you are also a danger to yourself, and increasingly, to others. I cannot, in good conscience, leave you something I believe would harm you more than help. Please, seek the help you need. If you ever want to rebuild, the door is open. But this is not the way. That was the moment everything changed. From that day forward, Nick reportedly began referring to himself as the erased. He'd mutter it under his breath. Write it on napkins during therapy. One friend said he even carved it into a hotel dresser drawer during a rehab stay. Erased by blood. Let that sit. Now you might ask, why such a dramatic response? Because, according to multiple family friends, Nick believed the removal wasn't just financial, it was symbolic. Rob hadn't simply denied him money. He denied him legacy. Everything Nick had grown up believing he would inherit, his father's name, respect, power, was suddenly placed behind glass. And worse, Tracy Reiner now had control over it. The same Tracy whom Nick had once accused of treating him like an embarrassment. The same Tracy who hadn't spoken publicly about her half-brother in over a decade. Sources inside the investigation claimed Tracy's private testimony during the reading of the 2020 estate plan was chilling. She allegedly told the attorney, Nick can't be trusted. He doesn't want a future. He wants vengeance. Which brings us to the next critical piece. The texts. 2 months before the murders, Nick began texting Rob daily. Sometimes up to 10 times a day. Most were short. Obsessive. Repetitive. Talk to me. You lied. What did you bury? I was your son. Rob didn't reply. At least not directly. But Michelle did. In a voicemail to Nick, now preserved in the case file, her voice cracks. You're scaring us. Please. This isn't you. We love you. It was the last known voicemail she ever left her son. Now comes the twist no one expected. 2 weeks before the double homicide, Rob and Michelle allegedly contacted a private investigator. Not to follow Nick, but to follow someone Nick was meeting with regularly. According to leaked documents, that person was an older man. Gray hair. Unlicensed. Always wore gloves. Paid in cash. The man is believed to be the elusive Dr. M. What did they find? We don't know. The investigators' final report was scheduled to be delivered on Sunday afternoon, the same day the murders occurred. It never made it to the Reiners. But now let's pivot to the real heart of this chapter. The night of the Christmas confrontation. December 24th, 2022. The Reiners hosted a private holiday dinner at their estate. Small group. Family only. One fireplace burning. A chef in the kitchen. But by 9 p.m., that holiday magic exploded. Nick, 3 glasses of wine in, reportedly stormed into the kitchen screaming at Rob. You told me I'd be in the will. You promised. I was 14 when you said that. Rob, allegedly calm, responded. You were 14. That was before the arrests. Before the drugs. Before everything. Nick's reply? So your love had terms. Michelle tried to defuse. It didn't work. Nick knocked over a table. Tracy called security. Nick was escorted out into the cold, barefoot, furious. The chef later told police Nick had left something behind that night. A folded piece of paper, stuck under his wine glass. All it said was, "This isn't over." 1 week later, Nick stopped attending therapy. 2 weeks after that, he was seen meeting with Dr. M again. A month later, Rob installed new locks. This wasn't a family drifting apart. This was a family in slow collapse. Which brings us to the final piece of this chapter, the missing will page. After the murders, detectives searched the Reiners' home thoroughly. Inside a hidden safe, behind a bookshelf, they found the estate documents. But one page was missing, the amendment page. The one outlining contingency clauses. According to legal experts, this is highly unusual. Most estate amendments are either stored digitally or filed separately with attorneys. But in this case, it was handwritten. Personal. Not filed. Gone. Stolen. Destroyed. Or used as leverage? Because here's what we know. A week before the murders, Nick visited a UPS store in Culver City. Security footage shows him scanning a document, then mailing it to an unknown P.O. box. Investigators believe it was the missing amendment. Why? Because 2 days after the murders, a mysterious package was delivered to TMZ. Inside, a flash drive containing a scanned legal document titled, Last Words of a Father Who Lied. TMZ hasn't released it publicly. They say law enforcement stopped them, urgently. But it raises a terrifying possibility. Did Nick kill his parents? After sending out evidence? To make sure the world knew his side? Did he believe this was justice? Or revenge? And now, with that document floating in the shadows of the media and the courts, everyone's asking, what truth was Rob Reiner hiding in his will? And who else knew? Because someone leaked the address of that P.O. box. And the person listed as its owner wasn't Nick. It was someone else. A name no one expected. And when that person was brought in for questioning, they said 7 words that sent shivers through the LAPD interrogation room. Nick didn't do this alone. He couldn't. If the crime scene was where the violence ended, then the hotel room was where the truth began to leak. Because whatever happened inside that small Santa Monica room wasn't the act of a man running from guilt. It was the act of someone waiting. Waiting for instructions. Waiting for consequences. Or waiting for the world to catch up to something he believed was already inevitable. So let me ask you something. If you had just committed the most infamous double homicide in modern Hollywood history, would you check into a hotel 4 miles away and go to sleep? Or would you run? Nick Reiner didn't run. And that choice alone has haunted investigators from day one. 6:11 a.m., Santa Monica. The motel wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a 5-star hideaway or a celebrity bolt hole. It was clean, anonymous, forgettable. The kind of place you choose when you don't want to be remembered. Nick arrived on foot. No luggage. No sunglasses. Just a hood pulled low and hands that staff described as shaking, but steady enough to sign. He used an alias. Paid cash. Didn't argue. Didn't ask questions. Room 214. 2nd floor. End of the hall. Now here's the first contradiction. Security cameras show Nick entering the room alone. But when crime scene technicians later processed that room, they found 2 distinct sets of fingerprints. One belonged to Nick. The other didn't match anyone in the system. Not Rob. Not Michelle. Not hotel staff. Unknown. And then there was the handprint. On the bathroom mirror. Not a smear. Not a wipe. A full palm impression. Perfectly centered. As if someone had stood there, stared at themselves, and pressed their hand flat against the glass. Forensic analysis revealed something unsettling. The handprint wasn't left with water. It was left with saline. Medical-grade saline. Ask yourself this. Why would saline be present in a cheap motel room bathroom? And more importantly, who brought it there? Inside the bathroom trash bin, detectives found an empty saline vial, the kind used for wound cleaning. Also found gauze, medical tape, a disposable glove. But here's the thing. Nick's injuries didn't require that level of care. The shallow cut on his arm could have been treated with a napkin and pressure. So why the supplies? Why the glove? Why the precision? This wasn't panic. This was procedure. Investigators believe someone else was in that room with Nick. Someone who knew how to clean a wound. Someone who didn't want to leave DNA. Someone who wore gloves. And now think back to the name. Dr. M. The man Rob and Michelle secretly hired a private investigator to follow. The man Nick called right after the party. The man whose number went dead 2 hours after Nick's arrest. The pieces are starting to line up. Inside the motel room, detectives also found something else. A folded receipt from a nearby pharmacy. Timestamp, 5:47 a.m. Items purchased: saline solution, gauze pads, antiseptic wipes, disposable gloves. Paid for in cash. Security footage from the pharmacy shows Nick entering. But here's the chilling detail. He wasn't alone. The footage is grainy, partially obscured. But there's a second figure. Taller, older, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. They never stand together at the register. They move separately. Professional. And when Nick exits the store, the second man leaves through a different door. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. Now let's talk about what was written. Because yes, there was writing. On the motel room desk, etched lightly into the cheap wood veneer with something sharp, were 3 words. IT had to end. No punctuation. No explanation. Just that. Was it a confession? A mantra? Or something someone told him to repeat? Psychologists consulted by the DA's office believe the phrase reflects externalized justification, the language of someone who believes they are carrying out a necessary act, not committing a crime. In other words, Nick didn't believe he was wrong. He believed he was finishing something. And then there's the timeline problem. Nick checked in at 6:11 a.m., but forensic estimates place the murders between 1:15 and 2:30 a.m. That leaves nearly 4 hours unaccounted for. 4 hours where Nick wasn't at the house, wasn't at the hotel, wasn't on camera. Where was he? Investigators believe that window is where everything truly fell apart. Cell tower data places Nick's phone briefly near a medical office complex in West LA around 3:10 a.m. The same complex where Dr. M's former practice was located before it mysteriously closed. Coincidence? Or a final meeting? Because when police later searched that abandoned office, they found something chilling. A desk drawer. Empty. Except for one thing. A post-it note. Written in red ink. You did what we discussed. No signature. No date. But handwriting analysis suggests it did not belong to Nick. Now let's pause. If Nick didn't act alone, what was his role? The muscle? The scapegoat? Or the willing executioner of a plan conceived by someone else? Because the more investigators dig into that hotel room, the clearer one thing becomes. Nick wasn't improvising. He was following steps. And that brings us to the most disturbing discovery of all. Hidden beneath the mattress, taped to the bed frame, was a folded piece of paper. A checklist. Yes, a checklist. Items included. Call M. Go back for box. Clean hands. Wait. The final item? Don't talk unless I say. Let that sink in. Unless I say. Not unless they say. Not unless lawyers say. Unless I say. Who is I? And why did Nick obey? Because when Nick was finally arrested later that day, he didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't ask for his family. He didn't even ask what he was being charged with. He asked one thing. Did he make it? Officers assumed he meant his father. He didn't. Now here's where the prison stabbing becomes critical. Because according to a confidential source inside the jail, Nick began talking. Not to guards. Not to lawyers. To another inmate. And what he said sent panic through the administration. Nick reportedly told the inmate, I was supposed to be safe until the trial. Safe? From who? Or from what? Within 48 hours, Nick was attacked. Stabbed. Not fatally, but precisely. Enough to warn. Enough to silence. Enough to remind him of the rules. Because whoever helped Nick, whoever guided him, didn't plan on him talking. And now the DA's office is racing the clock. Because if Nick decides to break silence, if he names Dr. M, if he reveals what was in that box left at the restaurant, this case doesn't just become a murder trial. It becomes a conspiracy. And that's exactly why the next stop in this story matters so much. Because the next piece of evidence was found inside Nick's backpack at the time of his arrest. And it leads directly to the gas station. The final public place he visited before the cuffs went on. A place where cameras don't blink. And where Nick made one last mistake. Ready to clean up the mess he left behind. Which brings us to the next chapter. The interrogation room. Where silence met suspicion. And where Nick finally cracked. What he said there changed the case forever. What happens when the cameras turn off and the questions don't? Because the interrogation room isn't about shouting. It's about waiting. About letting the quiet do the damage. And on the night Nick Reiner was led into that small, beige room at the South LA station, the silence stretched so long it began to feel intentional. He was placed in the chair at 10:41 p.m., hands cuffed behind his back, ankles free, a single bottle of water on the table. No lawyer present, yet. The clock on the wall ticked loudly enough to become a character in the room. Nick stared at it. Didn't blink. Didn't ask for anything. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. An hour. Two detectives entered and left without saying a word. A classic tactic. Let the suspect wonder. Let his thoughts spiral. Let the weight of what he's done, or thinks he's done, settle in. But Nick didn't spiral. He waited. That alone unsettled them. At 12:07 a.m., Detective Alvarez finally sat across from him. Middle-aged. Calm voice. No aggression. He didn't open a file. Didn't lay out evidence. Didn't accuse. He asked one question. Are you okay, Nick? Nick laughed. Not a big laugh. Just a soft exhale through his nose. Almost affectionate. Define okay. Alvarez leaned back. Let that land. Do you need medical attention? Nick looked down at his bandaged arm. Then back up. They already fixed it. Already. As if someone else had taken care of him. Alvarez made a note. Then another question. Where were you this morning? Nick tilted his head. Which morning? This wasn't confusion. This was control. For the next 30 minutes, Nick answered questions with questions. He corrected small details the detectives intentionally got wrong. He knew the timeline. He knew the charges. He knew what they'd found, which raised the first red flag. How did he know so much so quickly? At 12:46 a.m., Detective Kim joined the room. Younger, sharper, less patient. She placed a single photo on the table. A still image from the gas station camera. Nick leaned forward, studied it, smiled. That's a bad angle, he said. You should have used the one near the freezer. It shows my face better. Let that sink in. He wasn't denying it. He wasn't ashamed. He was curating. Kim slid another photo forward. The crime scene. Not graphic. Just enough. Nick didn't look away. He stared. Longer than necessary. And then he said something that caused both detectives to freeze. You cleaned it up wrong. Alvarez blinked. What? Nick tapped the table twice. The hallway. You missed a spot near the molding. That's where it started. The room went dead quiet. This wasn't information released to the public. This wasn't something Nick should have known unless he'd been there. Kim leaned in. Voice low. Nick, how do you know that? Nick's smile faded. For the first time since entering the room, his composure cracked. Just a little. Because I tried to stop it, he said. Tried. Alvarez exchanged a look with Kim. Stop what? Nick closed his eyes. And for a moment, just a moment, he looked like a child again. Tired. Lost. Cornered. Then he said it. They weren't supposed to die like that. Like that. Not at all. Not I didn't do it. But not like that. Alvarez kept his voice steady. How were they supposed to die, Nick? Nick opened his eyes. They were supposed to listen. A long pause. They never listened. And there it was. The beginning of the unraveling. Nick began talking, not in a straight line, but in fragments. Memories. Half-finished thoughts. References to conversations no one else could hear. He spoke about the safe. The missing page. The box at the restaurant. He spoke about promises made when he was young. About being told, repeatedly, that some things are too big for the truth. Kim pressed gently. Who told you that? Nick hesitated, and then said a name. Not his father's. Not his mother's. A name that made both detectives stiffen, because it belonged to someone outside the family. Someone powerful. Someone who had reason to keep things quiet. The name has never been released, but it triggered an immediate call to the DA's office. Now here's where everything changes. At 1:58 a.m., Nick asked for water. Kim handed him the bottle. As he drank, he said, almost casually, he said if I talked without permission, I wouldn't make it to trial. Kim's heart skipped. Who said that, Nick? Nick set the bottle down, looked directly at the camera, and whispered, You already know. That sentence alone forced the interrogation to pause. At 2:11 a.m., Nick was read his rights again. At 2:14 a.m., a public defender arrived. At 2:16 a.m., Nick went silent, but not before delivering one final line, one that still echoes in the halls of that station. They'll blame me because it's easier than believing the truth. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and didn't speak again. But the confession wasn't over. Because hours later, after Nick was transferred to county jail, Detective Alvarez reviewed the interrogation footage frame by frame. And he noticed something strange. Every time Nick mentioned it, every time he referenced orders, warnings, or consequences, Nick's eyes shifted to the same corner of the room. The corner where the camera wasn't. almost as if he believed someone was standing there, watching, listening. That detail alone triggered a psychological evaluation request. But before it could be completed, the prison attack happened. And suddenly, Nick's cryptic warnings didn't feel delusional. They felt prophetic. Because according to jail logs, Nick asked one final question before being moved to his cell. Not to guards, not to medical staff, to no one in particular. Did I do good? Do good for who? That question matters more than you think. Because when a man confesses without confessing, when he accepts blame without claiming ownership, it suggests something darker than guilt. It suggests obedience. And now, with Nick stabbed, isolated, and placed in protective custody, investigators are racing against a different clock, not to prove what Nick did, but to uncover who told him to do it, and whether that person is still out there. Because if Nick survives long enough to talk again, the next chapter won't be about a murder. It'll be about exposure. And the people who benefit from silence? They don't wait patiently. They act. Which brings us to the next turning point in this case. Rob Reiner's diary. Hidden, fragmented, and far more disturbing than anyone expected. What kind of child grows up in paradise and still feels abandoned? That's the question detectives kept circling as they sifted through Nick Reiner's life. Not just the last 48 hours, but the last 3 decades. Because when you strip away the headlines, the police tape, the blood-soaked floorboards, what's left is a boy who never quite found his place in a world that expected him to shine. Nick Reiner didn't just grow up wealthy. He grew up legend-adjacent. Film sets instead of playgrounds. Table reads instead of bedtime stories. Adults praising him for being so articulate before he was old enough to understand what that even meant. Imagine that pressure. Now imagine failing under it. From the outside, Nick's childhood looked like a dream. Private schools, tutors, summers on studio lots, family dinners with people whose names appeared in movie trailers. But insiders tell a very different story, one filled with emotional whiplash and impossible expectations. Rob Reiner was not an absent father, but he was a demanding one, a man driven by ideas, principles, discipline. When Rob entered a room, people listened. When Rob spoke, conversations stopped. Nick struggled just to be heard. Teachers reported early behavioral issues, mood swings, explosive anger followed by days of silence. At age 11, Nick was already seeing therapists. At 14, medication entered the picture. By 17, there were whispers of substance use, first alcohol, then pills. And here's the contradiction that haunts this story. Rob Reiner spent decades making films about empathy, understanding, humanity. But inside his own home, friends say he didn't know what to do with a son who couldn't get it together. One former family friend put it bluntly. Rob believed discipline fixed everything. Nick needed something else. Nobody knew what. By Nick's early 20s, the gap between father and son had turned into a canyon. Nick wanted to write, to direct, to be taken seriously, not as Rob Reiner's kid, but as himself. He pitched scripts, dark ones, angry ones. Studios passed, over and over. Each rejection chipped away at him. Each success of his father, a reminder of what he wasn't. By 24, Nick had entered rehab for the first time. Quietly, privately, the family released a carefully worded statement about exhaustion and creative burnout. But inside that facility, counselors were documenting something far more concerning. Paranoia. Nick reportedly believed people were talking about him, plotting against him, sabotaging his work behind closed doors. At first, doctors chalked it up to substance-induced anxiety. But the thoughts didn't go away when he got clean. They intensified. And yet, here's the twist. There were moments when Nick seemed to turn a corner. In 2015, he co-wrote a film with his father, a semi-autobiographical story about addiction, recovery, and fractured relationships. On paper, it was supposed to heal old wounds. Instead, it reopened them. Sources from the production say the collaboration was tense. Nick wanted creative control. Rob wanted structure. Meetings turned heated. One argument reportedly ended with Nick storming out, yelling, "You don't want a son. You want a mirror." Let that sink in. A mirror. Someone to reflect greatness back at you. After the film's release, reviews were mixed. The industry didn't embrace Nick the way he hoped. And once again, he spiraled. Multiple rehabs followed. Different facilities. Different doctors. Which brings us back to that name, Dr. M. Investigators digging into Nick's medical history found something alarming. In the past 6 years, Nick had cycled through no fewer than 4 psychiatrists. Most dropped him as a patient. One cited noncompliance. Another noted escalating fixation on perceived betrayals. But Dr. M? Dr. M stayed. Longer than anyone else. And according to leaked notes, Dr. M didn't just treat Nick. He listened. Nick spoke about being erased. About his parents locking away things that belonged to him. About a family secret that, in his words, would destroy everything if it ever came out. Doctors are trained to filter delusions from reality. But what if some of what Nick believed was real? Here's where the timeline gets uncomfortable. 2 months before the murders, Nick reportedly demanded access to a locked cabinet in Rob's home office. Family members say Rob refused. There was shouting. Doors slammed. Michelle cried. What was in that cabinet? Legal documents? Financial records? Something personal? We don't know yet. But we do know that after that argument, Nick sent a series of texts to friends that read like a goodbye. I tried. They never listened. It ends soon. Friends brushed it off as another emotional episode. Another mistake. Because Nick didn't see himself as failing anymore. He saw himself as wronged. And resentment is a dangerous thing when mixed with untreated mental illness. In the months leading up to the killings, Nick became increasingly isolated. He cut off friends, deleted social media, stopped answering calls, except one. Dr. M. Phone records show Nick called Dr. M repeatedly in the week before the murders.